Welcome to Goldfish on Games and Cover Disc Face Off, the show where we want the plastic, not the paper. And for August 1994 we are looking at Amiga Power, the one for Amiga, and Amiga Action. Fight! First up is Amiga Action, that had 2 demos, a bunch of PD games and a mini expansion. On disc 1 we have 3 options, with the Sensible Massacre being the first. And despite the name, this wasn't by Sensible Software. This is a PD game that gives you a detailed set of instructions and a few options. And the eventual game is... well... you play as the English goalie and you have to kick explosive-filled balls at the Holland football team. And I have to state this now, this feels all a little bit in bad taste. I have zero interest in football, so I have no idea what the sentiment surrounding this is, but killing the opposing team? That feels a bit wrong. And if you can get past that, then you realise this is mostly just missile command, just with different styled football pitches, and a time limit that you can change. You can also change how quickly the other team moves as well. It's clear that they ripped off the graphics from Sensible Soccer, so it doesn't look all that bad at least, but this is definitely not one for me. So moving on, we have Tic-Tac-Toe, and I know what you're thinking, but wrong! It's a fruit machine, and a very basic one at that. You just pull the handle. That's it. This is another shareware game from Mental Image, the team behind that 3-game collection we checked out in the last episode. But unlike those, there really isn't much going on in this game. You just keep pulling the handle till you run out of cash. The first game demo is Wembley International Soccer, which it had to be after my earlier comments, didn't it? And this is an AGA only game. And it doesn't look like it should be when it first starts. In fact, it looks like a basic Sensi Soccer style game, just with slightly bigger sprites. But I don't think it controls as well. All the players have this exaggerated momentum going on, which makes passing quite difficult, as well as having this weird thing that you aren't fully in control of the throw-ins and free kicks. Instead, you control one of the players that the ball be sent in their rough direction. Passing and shooting also, as stated, feels a little clunky, as it's meant to have this simple one-button pass, but it doesn't always work. And if you want to do a shot on the goal, then the magazine says you have to hold the fire button down for a little bit and then release, which I also found didn't always work. Amazingly, I did actually manage to get a goal, and then it showed off this cool side-on view for the replay. Which then stuck around. Turns out you can actually change the view at any time by using the V key. But seeing that time's almost up, well, that was it for this match. And if you wanted to play again, well, you're gonna have to restart, because just letting it go, it'll just keep playing itself. That's right, you only get one match and then the computer just plays against itself. The magazine says it's to show you how it's meant to be played, but in all of the games I watched, it always came out 0-0. And seeing those sound effects are really starting to grate on me, I think it's time to move on. And the demo of Disc 2 is DDay, which is a military simulation of the D-Day landings, if that wasn't obvious. And this is one that doesn't give you too much details on how to play, in-game or in the magazine. From what I can tell, you move your troops around based on their movement points, and you can get them to attack by moving onto an enemy. At this point you then get to decide who is going to help them out with the attack. And then you move on to this top-down view of the battle itself, where you can set up your units and orders and then play the battle out. I think the idea is that you can start and stop the action, then redirect your troops as things change, as well as deciding where the indirect fire is going to come from. which could be quite nice if it was quick and easy to do so, but a lot of this really isn't. So your only other option is to just autoplay it. That way you don't have to get into the nitty-gritty of it all. There are a lot of options for you to play around with, and it's not something you're going to quickly pick up. This is something you really need to sit down with a nice bulky manual and spend a week or so working it all out. Which does mean that there is some legs to this demo. But it also shows how slow the game is. Moving around the map is really sluggish, and interacting with the units really doesn't feel as easy or as smooth as it should be. The demo itself allows you to have a number of battles or 10 turns, so this is something that should keep you going for a while. But it's time now to move on to the PD selection, and first up is one that we've seen before, Missile Command. Yep, it's the little PD game that could, and now it's shown up on Amiga Action. So let's move on to the next one, which is Shoot Pontoon. This, as far as I can tell, is a variation on Blackjack. Or Blackjack is a variant on it, I'm not fully sure. And I await your comments telling me what the truth is. The basics seem to be the same though, you want to get 21, or just beat the score of the dealer. And you do this by buying your first card for the amount that you bet, and then you can twist to get more cards, or stick when you're happy. There's also this burn button, that if your cards add up to 14, it allows you to swap them out for something else. Or at least that's what it looked like to me, I'm not entirely sure. When I looked up this game, there was no mention of it at all. But other than that, this is a relatively straightforward game, and pretty much if you've ever played Blackjack, you'll know what you're doing here. The last PD game is Simon. A game that is by far the simplest thing we'll see today, and possibly ever, in covered disc face-off, as it'll flash up some colours, and then you just need to use the F keys to repeat it. And amazingly, for such a simple game, they managed to make it really annoying, as the speed it displays the sequence at is really slow. So as the sequence gets longer, so all the time you'll be sat around being bored. But when it comes to repeat it, you'll have to do it much faster. Just waiting a second or so is enough for the game to claim you failed. So you can't think, you just have to do. And I think Amiga Action would have been better off leaving this one off the disc entirely. But amazingly, they actually found space for one more thing. And that is this extra for Graham Gooch's cricket, in the form of an England and New Zealand team that matches up with the series that was happening at the time. Now, I've tried to get this to load and I have no idea, it just keeps complaining at me. As it seems I know even less about cricket than I do about football. And I know even less about this game than I do about any other game I've ever played. But for those that enjoy cricket, and was interested in the series that was taking place in August of '94, I'm sure this would have been a lovely little addition. And they would have absolutely no problems in getting this to load. But I think it's time we moved on to the next magazine, which is The One for Amiga, which had a whopping 3 game demos, as well as a single PD game. So let's start off with the only PD title, called Drelbs. Or at least I think that's how you say it. Corrections in the comments, please. And after a basic title screen, we're dumped into the game with very little in the way of intros or instructions. But the basic gist is that you have to move around this maze, pushing the walls, while avoiding the nasty. When you manage to get all the walls to line up to make a square, they will vanish, and a solid block will take its place. Well, that's if you're outside the square, not inside, obviously. Your goal is to try and make as many blocks as possible, and eventually they will start to change. In one mode, they will kill you if you try to enter them, or it might form the face of the enemy and then return to being an empty square, but one time it will change to a fancier effect, and it will start moving around the converted blocks, and it's at this point you want to try and enter it, as that will finish the level, or at least the first half of the level, as you now have to move around the screen trying to collect all the faces so you can move on to the actual next level, which will increase the number of baddies you have to deal with. And I think you can guess how this is going to go from here on in. It's a fun little game, and it's certainly more creative than some of the games that we've played. The first demo is for Kid Chaos, or as it was known at the time, Kid Vicious. This is clearly based on the near finished game, as we have the final game's loading screen and level that has clearly got all the art that we would find in the release game. This is the second level in the game, which I think is a good pick, as it's quite long and has quite the range of things that you can expect in the full game. There are springs, underwater bits, baddies that will get in the way, lots of routes. It's a pretty decent level all in all, and one that you'll have to go around trying to bash all the flowers, as this is a destroy 'em up, as you have a targeted number of flowers that you have to bash before the exit will open up. And you'll really want to explore this map, as it's the only one you're getting in this demo, which is a real shame, as I feel they could have put a few other levels or even some custom ones in, you know, to really show off this game. But nope, all you've got is the single level, and that's it. The second disc starts with Vital Light, a puzzle game that might be trying to big itself up more than it really should. You play as this round thing on the bar, and you can move left or right, and you can rotate it around, which changes the selected colour. Your goal is to fire the colour into the bricks that are falling down, and make them match so they'll vanish. The trick to it is that there's actually 2 tones to each colour, and you'll have to match the tones as well, so you might have to hit it multiple times for it to match. It's all nicely animated, with those faces at the side looking like they're chewing when you move, and the first level is easy enough. But from the second level onwards, the game likes to throw all sorts of curveballs, like these barriers that you have to ram to break. And not just a single hit either, you have to do it multiple times, and there'll be a number of them that you'll have to break as well. Or you'll have these blocks that have smaller ones on the top. Those are telling you what the colour and the tone must be for you to clear that set, as otherwise you can set them to any colour you like. But you do have to keep an eye on your ink, as it will run down as you use it more. And then there was this pusher that just shoved me out of the way and really felt cheap, as its only goal was to stop you moving around freely, and then it would throw a load of bricks at the other side, and it just blocks you from doing the matches. It's just really annoying. It's a game with some really interesting ideas, but the cheapness of some of them really doesn't sit well with me, and it's a game I've never really managed to get on with. Finally, we have Wild Cup Soccer, which starts with no fanfare. Well, apart from the actual fanfare, that is, as it just drops you right into the game with no warning. There's no title screen or anything. And this is an isometric follow-up to Brutal Sports Football, which, as you can tell, is a violent future sports style game, where you can punch and kick your enemy as much as you like. And you'll need to do this if you want to get anywhere in this game, as they're going to be doing the exact same thing back to you. And if you do get enough violence in, you can actually send a head flying. Do it enough times and you can get a head trick. Now, due to the isometric look, I find it a little hard to try and line up the shots at the goal. And on top of that, the controls feel a little bit laggy in places, so it's not the easiest thing to do. That, or it just takes longer for you to kick the ball than you might actually expect. But thankfully, you can just hit the goalie and just walk it in. It won't work every time, but I've managed to do it enough in this game to score quite a few goals. The game itself looks pretty decent with quite a few characters on screen and lots going on. But it being a sports title, it's still not my favourite thing. More so when everything around the ball just randomly explodes every so often. No idea what's going on. But damn, look at the buns on that ref. He must be at least 75% ass. And if we can tear our eyes away from it, I think it's time to move on to Amiga Power, as it's the last magazine of the episode. This included 2 discs, with technically 2 commercial demos and 3 PD games. Starting with a demo for Impossible Mission 2025. That feels a little bit of a psych out, as it's really a demo for the classic mode in 2025.
Another visitor. Stay a while. Stay forever.
Which was the original game finally ported to the Amiga, and included in the full release. Now this is time limited, or I should say more time limited than the actual game. And if you've not played it before, you have to travel around a series of lifts and enter rooms, where you have to scan everything in there to try and find power-ups that you can trigger at terminals, but also try to find parts of the key, that when you have all of them, you'll then need to try and arrange them correctly. But that is something that you'll have pretty much no chance of doing in this demo, as that time limit will hit you pretty hard. As will the robots. They love to kill you. And each time you die, that timer will jump up a little bit. Something that was in the original that would have been nice here was the fact it would randomly generate the layouts. But that, as you might have guessed, was dropped for the demo, so you'll get the exact same one each time. So this is an interesting demo, but I think it would have been better if they actually included the first level for the updated game, because that's what everyone really wanted to play. Because they didn't even bother to update the graphics of the original game, so it doesn't even look as good as the Master System version.
I am my robot.
The first shareware game is Tanks and Stuff, which lets you know you're missing some stuff from the start, as there's no level editor, there's only 2 maps to play on, and you don't have the option of changing the game time either, or setting more than one AI. And in-game we can see it's a 4-player game, with 3 of the tanks being controlled by people and the 4th by the computer, which makes 2 of the tanks completely useless in the video. The goal is to collect the flags that you can see on the map, and then return them to your base. And you can only hold 3 of them at once, so you can't just go on a long run and then come back. You can also steal them from the other bases, which is actually required as there's a limited number of them in the map for you to find. Your tank has a cannon that you can use to protect yourself, and the bases also have a turret that will try and help out as well when one of the other enemies tries to enter it. There's also a few other turrets dotted around the map that will attack anyone that gets too close. The other level is a boat-based one, but plays pretty much the same as if you were on land. It's a fun enough game, but the shareware edition does feel a little bit too limited to play on your own. Which is similar to the PD game Infiltrator, as it's only 2 players. You play on a pitch that looks very familiar to speedball players, but the game itself is different, as you have 2 goals. And you have to either race across the pitch to enter the other side's goal, which will gain you a point, or you hit the other player when they're on your side, which will lose them a point. I can start to see how the strategy and cunning would come out in a game like this. If you had 2 actual players, that is. Playing on your own, there isn't too much for you to do. There's also not too much in the way of sound effects either. So unfortunately, it's another interesting game, but one that does require multiple people for it to be fun. On the second disc we get another bit of shareware, Bandit Mania. And yes, this is the second fruit machine of the episode. But there is a reason for that, as technically this, the technology fruit machine, is part of the Bandit Mania shareware collection, along with Tic-Tac-Toe. This one at least had some actual effort put into it, as there's holds, nudges, and there's even a high-low board for you to play. And if you manage to get 3 Ts, then you actually get onto the game board, and this will give you the option of playing a number of games, some of which were disabled for the demo. And to be honest, some of these games might be better than the actual Bandit machine, as you get a pretty decent enough version of Minesweeper. And it's most likely the best thing of this demo. The final shareware game is Excellent Card Games, which has a very Windows 3.1.1 feel to it, and it gives us 5 different card games to play, so obviously I had to go with Frustration. A game that gets its name because it's, well, frustrating, as it requires a good chunk of luck for you to win the game, as you have to place the king, queen and jacks in specific places on the board, which is along the outside. And if you've already placed a regular card there, then, well, it's game over. Because you have to keep placing cards until the whole board is full before you can then start removing them, and then you can remove any that add up to 10. Which is all nicely explained in the built-in help that it has for each game. And it even gives you some basic prompts on what you need to do next, so that's very nice. The shareware part comes in as it's got this nag screen that will show up from time to time. That, and it also won't save your stats to the disc. But that does leave quite a lot for you to get playing with. But as this is another card game collection, I don't really feel it's worth looking into any more of them, because, well, we've seen a lot of these already. Which means we're on to the scores for the magazines. And, well, in last place I think it's Amiga Action. A poor showing in the PD and some very average game demos. In second place, I think it has to be Amiga Power. Impossible Mission was fun, but most of the PD games required 2 players. So in first place it has to be the one for Amiga. It had some fun, if short demos, and a nice little PD game. And as always, if you agree or disagree, or if you had any of these magazines back in the day, let me know down in the comments. And until next time, I was the Goldfish. That was more bandits than I was expecting, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thank you for watching this cover disc episode. If you enjoyed it, then I've done a number of other videos that you might want to watch. Or you can hit those buttons just under the video, you know the ones I mean, as they will let me know that you liked it, and will let you know when there's more on the way. Or you can join the Discord to chat with like-minded people.